Your brother needs focus for the business, Mom would say whenever I complained about doing everything myself. You're so good at caring for us, honey. My name is Miriam. I am 24 years old, and this is the story of how I took back what was rightfully mine. For 3 years I put my life on hold. I moved back home after college to take care of my parents when Dad's Parkinson's got worse and Mom couldn't manage alone. My brother Jake, who is 5 years older than me, lived just 20 minutes away but was always too busy with the family business to help. That business, Wilson's Hardware, had been started by my grandfather, built up by my father, and then handed to Jake on a silver platter when Dad got sick. Your brother needs focus for the business, Mom would say whenever I complained about doing everything myself. You're so good at caring for us, honey. Good at it? I changed Dad's clothes when his hands shook too much to button his shirts. I cooked special meals that he could swallow easily. I drove Mom to her doctor appointments for her heart condition. I managed their medications, paid their bills, and still somehow finished my law degree online during the nights when they were asleep. I wasn't good at caregiving, I was just the only one doing it. Jake would visit on Sundays, always bringing expensive whiskey for himself, sitting in Dad's old armchair telling stories about the hardware store like he was some business genius. Dad would beam with pride while I served them coffee and snacks that I had prepared. The Jefferson contract is going to put us on the map, Jake would boast. We're supplying all the hardware for their new apartment complex. That's wonderful, son, Dad would say, his voice weak but his eyes bright. No one ever asked about my law studies or the fact that I had graduated at the top of my class despite everything. When I passed the bar exam, Jake brought a small cake from the grocery store. When he landed a new contract, my parents took him out to dinner at the steakhouse downtown. Maybe I should have known what was coming. Maybe the signs were all there. But nothing prepared me for the day the lawyer called after my parents' accident. It had been raining and Dad insisted on driving even though his medication made him drowsy. They hit a tree. They died together, at least, that was the only mercy in all of this. Jake and I sat across from Mr. Peters, Dad's attorney for 30 years, in his wood-paneled office. I was still numb, still wearing the black dress from the funeral the day before. As per your parents' will, Mr. Peters said, adjusting his glasses, the family home goes to Jacob, along with full ownership of Wilson's Hardware and all business assets. To Miriam, he paused, looking down at the paper, a sum of $25,000 and her mother's jewelry collection. The room seemed to tilt sideways. The house I had lived in for the past 3 years, the business I had watched my father build, the savings accounts I had carefully managed when Dad's hands became too shaky to sign checks, all of it was going to Jake. There must be some mistake, I said, my voice sounding strange in my ears. Mr. Peters gave me a sympathetic look. I'm afraid not. The will was updated last year. Jake cleared his throat. I think Mom and Dad knew the business should stay in one pair of hands. And the house, well, you were planning to move out anyway once they... He didn't finish the sentence. I don't remember much about the rest of the meeting. I remember walking to my car in the rain without an umbrella. I remember sitting in the driveway of what was now Jake's house, staring at the peeling paint on the porch that Dad had always meant to fix. That night I packed up my things. Jake had generously told me I could take my time moving out. 2 weeks, he suggested. 2 weeks to leave the home where I had spent the last 3 years of my life taking care of our dying parents. I moved into a small apartment across town and tried to figure out what to do next. The $25,000 wouldn't last long, especially with student loans from law school. I had put my career on hold for my parents, turning down job offers at prestigious firms because I couldn't leave town. Now I had nothing to show for it except Mom's old jewelry box and a check that felt like a tip for years of service. 2 months passed. I found work at a small local law firm specializing in estate planning. Ironic, I know. The pay was modest, but it was a start. I avoided family friends who would ask about Jake in the business. I declined Jake's invitation to Sunday dinner at my parents' house. Then one day Mrs. Finley came into our office. She was in her 70s, a long-time customer of Wilson's Hardware. I need to update my will, she said. My grandson is helping me with some investments using that nice Wilson boy's new service. I looked up from my desk. New service? Oh yes, dear. Jake's investment program through the hardware store. Many of us old-timers are putting our savings in. He's guaranteeing 12% returns. Can you imagine? My fixed income barely gets 2% at the bank. Something cold settled in my stomach. The hardware store didn't offer investment services. My father had always been strictly retail, no financial products whatsoever. How long has this been going on? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Oh, about a year now. Started small, but word's gotten around. Half the seniors at my complex have money with Jake now. A year. Right around the time my parents updated their will. That evening I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to the public library and searched through local business records. Wilson's Hardware was registered as a retail business, not a financial institution. There was no SEC filing, no registration with the State Financial Regulatory Board. Over the next week, I used my lunch breaks to visit the senior centers in town. I brought donuts and coffee and asked casual questions about investments and retirement. At every center, I heard the same story. Jake Wilson was helping seniors grow their nest eggs through a special investment program. High returns, low risk, exclusive to longtime customers and friends of the family. It was a classic Ponzi scheme. Jake was using new investors' money to pay returns to the earlier ones, probably skimming plenty off the top for himself. No wonder he needed the house and the business free and clear. He needed assets to keep up appearances. But I needed proof. My roommate from college, Sarah, now worked at the bank where Wilson's Hardware had its accounts. I invited her for coffee. I need a favor, I said after we caught up. It's about Jake's business. Sarah frowned. What kind of favor? I think he's running a scam through the store. Taking investments from seniors without any proper licensing or registration. I need to see the account activity. Miriam, you know I can't do that. I could lose my job. It's illegal. I nodded. I know. But what Jake's doing could be stealing life savings from elderly people, including some of Dad's oldest friends. She hesitated. I can't give you statements or anything in writing. Just tell me what you see. Unusual patterns, large transfers. 3 days later, Sarah called me. There are big cash deposits several times a month, and large transfers to an offshore account every few weeks. It doesn't match the normal pattern of a hardware store. It was enough to start with. Next, I needed to understand exactly how Jake had convinced my parents to change their will. I made an appointment with Mr. Peters, claiming I needed help understanding some tax implications of my inheritance. Mr. Peters, I said once we were seated in his office, I've been wondering about when my parents updated their will last year. Do you remember their state of mind? He shifted uncomfortably. They seemed clear-headed enough. Was Jake present? A longer pause. He drove them to the appointment. Did he stay in the room during the signing? Mr. Peters sighed. Miriam, what are you getting at? I leaned forward. Dad had Parkinson's. His medication affected his thinking. Mom would do anything he wanted. And Jake was monitoring their every move during that appointment. I can't discuss this further, he said stiffly. But his discomfort told me everything I needed to know. Armed with my suspicions about the investment scheme and the circumstances of the will change, I made my boldest move yet. I went to see Detective Harmon at the local police department. He had been my father's friend for 30 years. I don't have enough for a formal investigation, he told me after I explained everything. But I can ask some informal questions about these investments. If there's enough smoke, we might find fire. 2 weeks later, Jake called me. We need to talk, he said, his voice tight. Someone's been asking questions about the store's finances. Have they? I replied innocently. That's strange. Cut the crap, Miriam. I know it's you. Meet me at the house tonight. I arrived at our parents' home at 7. Jake was pacing in the living room, a glass of whiskey in his hand. What the hell do you think you're doing? He demanded as soon as I walked in. I sat down calmly on the couch. I'm making sure our parents' legacy isn't destroyed by fraud. It's not fraud. It's a private investment club. Completely legal. Without a license. Without registration. Taking money from seniors with promises of returns you can't possibly deliver legitimately? That's the definition of fraud, Jake. He slammed his glass down. You have no idea what it takes to run a business. Dad was driving it into the ground before I took over. The big box stores were killing us. I had to find new revenue streams. By stealing from Dad's friends? By creating opportunity. Everyone wins, they get better returns than any bank, and we keep the business afloat. I shook my head. Until you can't pay them anymore. Or until someone calls the SEC. Or the police. Jake's face paled. What have you done? Nothing yet, I said, crossing my legs. But I will unless we make a new arrangement. What kind of arrangement? He asked cautiously. You're going to shut down the investment scheme immediately. Return all the money. He laughed bitterly. Impossible. It's been spent, reinvested. Figure it out. Sell your new BMW if you have to. Second, we're going to renegotiate our inheritance. The will is final. I smiled thinly. Wills can be contested, especially when there's evidence of undue influence on elderly people with cognitive impairment. And fraud investigations tend to freeze all assets. Jake stared at me for a long moment, then sank into Dad's old armchair. What do you want? 50% ownership of the hardware store. The house sold and proceeds split evenly. And you come clean with me about how you convinced them to change the will. He took a long drink. They were worried about you, he said finally. Thought you needed to find your own path instead of being tied to the family business. Said the money would give you a fresh start. The words stung even though I had suspected something similar. Always the afterthought even in their final decisions. That may be true, I said, keeping my voice steady. But I doubt you discouraged them. And I doubt you told them about your little investment club that was using the business as collateral. Jake and I negotiated until midnight. By the end, we had an agreement. I would become a 40% owner of Wilson's Hardware, with full oversight of the financial operations. The house would be sold and divided 60/40ths in my favor, acknowledging my years of caregiving. Jake would dismantle the investment scheme gradually, returning all funds over the next 6 months. How can I trust you won't go to the police anyway? Jake asked as I prepared to leave. Because despite everything, you're still my brother. And this is still our parents' legacy. I don't want to destroy it, I just want my fair share. The next 6 months were tense. I continued at my law firm but spent evenings and weekends at the hardware store, learning the business from the ground up. Jake resented my presence but couldn't do much about it. Together, we managed to repay most of the investors by taking out a legitimate business loan and selling some of the store's excess inventory. It wasn't easy. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, thinking about my parents and wondering if they had ever valued what I had done for them. There were days I wanted to walk away from the whole mess and start fresh somewhere else. But this was my inheritance too, not just the money or the business but the responsibility to make things right. A year has passed now. Wilson's Hardware is slowly becoming profitable again, legitimately this time. Jake and I have a working relationship, not warm but functional. I've moved into a nicer apartment with the money from the house sale. Sometimes I wear pieces from Mom's jewelry collection to work. I still think about my parents every day. I wonder if they would be proud of how I fought for myself or ashamed of the family rift. I wonder if they ever realized how much I sacrificed for them. But I've stopped waiting for approval I'll never receive. At 24, I've learned that sometimes justice doesn't come unless you demand it. Sometimes inheritance isn't what's given to you, it's what you claim for yourself. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.